Everyone, welcome to the third session within our Online Animal Handling series. My name is Jenny Ivey. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Tennessee and serve as the State Equine Extension Specialist. So really excited to have each of you here with us today. And hopefully you're joining us back from being with us over the last several weeks. So today we'll be talking a little bit about how to work cattle and doing some close contact maneuvers and still keeping that low stress mindset. So we'll turn it over to Kevin Thompson, the station director at the Middle Tennessee Research and Education Center over in Spring Hill. Before we get started, again today, just like we did last week, there'll be a lot of videos that we'll be watching live as Kevin kind of narrates through what he wants us to hear and how he's approaching some of these different techniques. So if you're having trouble watching the videos streaming through the webinar, feel free to minimize that and then actually go over to the website down at the bottom of your screen here, tiny.utk.edu/animal handling series. That'll bring you to the UT Horse YouTube channel, in which we've actually loaded all the videos in order so you can watch alongside, again, if your video gets a little garbled. And so just to start, again, similar to our other sessions, we're just going to launch a quick poll for you just to help us know a little bit more about you as our audience. And so if you don't mind to take that really quickly, even if you've taken it before, please provide that information to us. It's really helpful as we move through and look at the sessions overall. So I'm going to turn it over to Kevin and let him say hello. Just quickly to introduce the other panelists we have on here today. Kelly Melvin is an animal science graduate student. She works with me and is about to start her second year. We have Ashley Savage, who assists over at the Middle Tennessee Research and Education Center. And we also have Jenny Goodrich, who's a county director in Morgan County over in the eastern part of the state. So thanks to each of them for helping today. And I'll let Kevin share a little bit more about himself.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Ivey. It's really been a privilege to be able to share some of the things that I get to do on a daily basis and have a passion for, and that's working with livestock. I've been doing it my entire life, and really I think a lot of what we've talked about in the previous two sections really is dedicated to really taking the responsibility of working with the livestock under our care and taking that responsibility serious. And now more than ever, as most of you know, we're really under a magnifying glass in people can, most of our farms are on public roads and people can just drive up and see the things that we're doing. So how we train the horses that we ride, how we manage and move the cattle that are under our care is really impactful and gives us the opportunity to be a true advocate, a positive advocate for the industry that we so love to be involved with. And today we're going to really do something and get to view something that is probably my favorite part in animal handling, especially when it comes to utilizing the horse, the equine. It really makes the opportunity to work cattle in a very, very confined environment a very safe process and truly enhances that low stress technique that we like to utilize. It keeps the cattle comfortable, it keeps the cows comfortable, it keeps the calves comfortable, and it really provides a safe environment, not only for us, the handler, but for those cattle that we're working with. And it all goes back to really redundancy and patience and repetition in training the horses that we're riding. And once we've done that, we've developed that pattern, or we've developed that behavior into a patterned effect so that the horse is really able to react in real time without a whole lot of cue from us. And as you'll see, and we're going to talk about this as we go through today's videos, the rider can get in the way of the horse accomplishing effectively what we want that horse to accomplish. So we have to be in a low stress mind frame too. Us, the handler, us, the rider, also have to be in a low stress environment so that we're reducing the stress on our horse and in turn reducing the stress on our cattle. So Dr. Ivey's going to start off with a video first, and then she's going to transition it back over to me. So really the initial video that Dr. Ivey is showing is bringing the cattle into a more confined area. Last week, we gathered these cattle from the pasture. We brought them from the pasture. We utilized those 3 points of pressure that we talked about. We gathered the herd, then we began moving the herd. Once we began moving the herd, we strung them out and we worked them from the side. So we had somebody behind pushing. We had somebody working the side to keep those hierarchy groups developed. As you remember, we talked about the low end of the hierarchy is on both ends of the herd, the front and the rear, with the most dominant cattle being in the middle. That goes back to that survival concept that we talked about. And so it's so important that we move cattle from the side, forwards and back, instead of always from the rear, so we maintain that hierarchy. Now we've gone through that, we've got these cattle out of the pasture, and we've entered in or entering into the smaller, more confined area with a heightened sense of hazard for both the handler and the cattle. So let's just kind of watch this video. And right now I'm riding Fritz. She's my 6-year-old mare. And she's still in training. These horses stay in training for, you know, by the time they're 10 years old, they're pretty well set in what they're doing. And I just kind of want you to observe what we're doing here. We're sorting the calves off from the cows. So we're being opportunistic right now. So as the calves fall back, being the least dominant in there, we're going ahead and sort those off. We're doing that for a couple of reasons. We're doing that for the purpose of safety. But I want you to also notice the horse maneuvers, how Fritz in this situation, how she moves. She's a horse that's very patient. She's a horse that does wait on me for some cues, but she's a horse that's very flexible, very athletic. As you watch her move off of her hind legs, as you watch her really flex and bend in her neck, she's what I would consider a very, very athletic horse, a horse that really has what it takes to be a good cow horse that can maneuver in a very, very tight spot and hit those angles, bend the right way, and get the job done in a manner that really doesn't take a lot of stress. So I want you to kind of watch her. She's my red roan. And then as we move through this video, we're going to enter into another video that's bringing another group of cattle in, but I'm going to be on a different horse. I'm going to be on the horse we call Elsie. And I want you to notice the differences. Elsie is not really, I think, as refined in her movements, as athletic in her movements as Fritz is. But just because we have two horses that approach things in a different way does not mean either way is more correct or either way is more incorrect than the other. As long as we're accomplishing the job in an effective, really low stress manner. But basically, from a cow handling perspective, whenever we're working our livestock, we like to sort the calves off from the cows. That really serves two purposes. It serves a safety purpose because these are 2- and 3-month-old calves. It prevents the likelihood that they're going to get stepped on or injured throughout the handling process. And so right now, Dr. Ivy, I think that's the end of that clip, and we'll go ahead and share my screen now. And that's going to be screen 1. And optimize. All right, and share. How does that look, everybody?
Looks good, Kevin.
Very good. All right, so now we've transitioned from Fritz, the red roan, to my bay roan, Elsie. Now I want you to kind of see how she handles things. And while you're watching that, just watch her movements. Watch how she flexes in her pole. Watch how she flexes in her neck and then down at the withers. You'll notice it's not as distinct and drastic as it was with Fritz, which tells me that she is not as athletic a horse. So kind of watch that. But at the same time, let me also explain the process of handling we're doing here from the cattle perspective. We're being opportunistic in sorting as many of these calves off as we can as we bring them into the pens. This is a process that's really, really awesome in terms of training a horse to have patience, in training a horse to really understand what you're wanting in terms of being able to hit the right angles and not approach those cattle too quickly. And I like to call Elsie, which is the horse right here, the bay on my bulldozer. And Fritz, she's more of my sports car. So Elsie kind of goes at things in a very aggressive manner. But she really is able to get the job done in a very effective manner. And again, so we're sorting these calves off as we can. We're not being too abrupt and trying to get them all off at the same time, because when you do that, you force or you put too much pressure on the entire herd. So we're, in essence, and I've said it a couple of times already, being opportunistic, getting these calves off as they present themselves or present the opportunity to get them off or to pull them off the herd. And throughout this process, so we've got these cattle up, and this is actually a different set of cattle. Now we're back on Fritz. Now I want you to watch her. And as we're watching her and her movements, one of the things that I think we always have to do is to be intentional with our approach and observation. Let me try to move this around a little bit. Yep. And so when we enter the pen, the initial sort's usually pretty easy. Calves, I'll tell a lot of people, always kind of, they're like cream. If you ever used to milk a cow and you don't go and you take that milk and put it in the refrigerator, you come back next morning and what rises to the top, the cream does. Well, those calves tend to always end up at the very front end of the herd. A lot of that's based on a natural behavior of curiosity. You know, this is the first time they've probably been in this pen. This is the second or third time they've really been this close to the horse. You know, they were this close to the horse whenever we caught the calves and tagged them and did the initial processing. So a lot of it's curiosity. And so that initial sort's pretty easy. But as we get deeper into the herd, one thing that we want to make sure we do is just to be patient and realize it's going to become more and more difficult. And that's when we really want to rely upon the training that we've put into these horses to make this process easier. Now, I will state this, if we were on foot doing this, it would be a lot more difficult because the cattle are actually being more responsive and actually having less of a negative response to the horse than they would to me on foot walking up towards them and into the herd. We're actually able to move quicker and get closer to hit that shoulder angle so we can get a response with these calves much easier than we could if we were on foot. And at the same time, we're more able to retain that herd behind us while we're moving these calves out than we would if we were on foot. One of the main reasons that I think it's so effective utilizing horses with cattle is that it's just really a patience thing. And we're moving these calves out and sorting them off. So that was one of the youngest calves in the herd and took just a little bit more pressure to do that. And so the horse was able to add pressure. And both horses and all horses that I've ever trained to work cattle with, I do like to teach them just to nibble, nip. They're not biting or anything harmful, but to reach down and grab the tail head of either the calf, the yearling steer or heifer or cow that we're trying to move, just to encourage movement. And so that's one thing I think that's very impactful in understanding the relationship between a cow and a horse, is a horse is able to get close enough to nip a calf or a cow on the tail head without that cow ever kicking them. Okay, so if you or I were to do that, we're probably not going to get close enough to grab that tail head on that calf or that cow. And if we were, there's a possibility that we're going to get kicked, especially when we're in a more confined area. So if you'll just observe here, and I'm going to try not to talk a lot, and if you have any questions and want to type those out, please do. But the title of this clip is just approach and assess the situation. So we've done our initial sort. Those are the easier sorts. That's when the cream rises to the top and we can get them off pretty easy. So now we're having to be a little bit more patient with how we approach and sort these calves off. And I want you just to kind of observe all the different things. And I'm going to ask Jenny to help me at the end of this to talk just a little bit about how we can really better train our horses and how important it is to teach our horses to flex and to bend. And if you'll watch, that's all these horses are doing within this sorting process. They're being patient and they're waiting. They're moving forward. They're flexing out of their head and neck, and then they're bending their body. And I'm trying to be calm and not get in the way of it. But if you saw that, if I could pause that just a second, it's really about angles. And if you'll pay attention, I'm going to try to get back one more time. It's not going to happen. Right here. Right there. So the angles, and we base our angles over that point of pressure, which is the shoulder. And so we stepped in front of the shoulder of that cow. We stopped that cow's movement. We were behind the shoulders of those calves, and we allowed those calves to move forward. And that allowed us to finish the calf sort on that group of cows. And that really is all based on patience and waiting, assessing the situation, and then moving towards the angles and allowing your horse to flex and to bend itself into position. Now, controlling controlled movement. Okay, so we have to think as the rider, and I want you to watch Fritz. And this is what I talked about her being a very flexible, a very athletic horse. She's a horse that's wanting to work. And you notice that I've trained all my horses. Ultimately, I start all my horses in a snaffle bit, and then I transition out of that snaffle bit once I've gained trust and control, just to a halter, just to a rope halter. And what that allows me to do, it allows me to maintain a softness in my horses and allow them to do their work. And so if you can just watch her, she knows when to be very athletic. She knows when to move. And I have to be patient as the rider not to get in her way. And I'm giving her some rein cues. I'm giving her some leg cues. But if you'll notice, she's really watching. She's bending that head down. She's bending at the pole to pay attention to those calves and those cows. And then she's enacting the correct movement upon them, either behind or in front of the shoulder, to get them to move in the direction that we desire them to go. You notice there's a tremendous amount of athleticism in a horse that if you're riding, you really don't recognize it. You truly do appreciate it when you're watching it from above, seeing how she moves her front end from side to side to gain the control angle or the control position upon each of those cows. And now we talk about draws right here. If you'll notice, it gets easier to get these calves to move out of the pen because we've got cows in this pen over here. We've got calves here, so the calves naturally funnel to this side, and this is an open lane that they are drawn to. And then also, these cows are not only being drawn this way to this set of calves, but they're also, once we exit here, drawn by these cows. So it makes it easier to move our cows into the handling facility, except for that cow. She got a little disturbed as she came out. So let me show you that and see how the natural response is to this cow, these 4 cows and the one that came out. Okay, so if you'll watch, this cow comes out of the chute. For some reason, she was startled. Well, you notice that the action of her being startled is actually affecting these cows not wanting to move in. So that gives us the opportunity to practice pressure and release. So you notice these cows are trying to get by me. I did not move forward on those cows. I actually moved backwards so I could hold my pressure point, and that in turn made them turn and go away. If I continued forward pressure at that point, those cows would have busted past me, and they would have been much more difficult to gather the next time, because every negative event that we can have that they're startled and move past is going to create an additive behavior and allow them to continue to try and do that negative behavior. So horse control equals cow control. So really I want to maintain a very small presence, but a very dominant presence with the horse. I don't want to move in too quick. I don't want to move in too slow, but I want to be that presence that those cows are paying attention to. And we place ourselves in the correct position. So that is an understanding and a necessity on us as handlers to know where we need to position ourselves. So not only do we really focus on training the horse to do the right job, but we have to know where and when to be within that cow herd in order to train that horse properly. Another thing we like to really train our horses to do whenever we're working cattle, or whether we're riding trails or riding through pastures or whatever, is to be able to handle obstacles and use things to our advantage. And gaits are something the horse needs to learn how to effectively utilize in an efficient way, because I can be wore out at the end of the day. I don't know if you've noticed how many times I've opened and shut gates on the back of this horse. If the horse makes that difficult on us, we're going to be wore out at the end of the day. That's going to accelerate our aggravated attitude. But if it's easy and the horse responds well, you know, just simply like this right here, it makes our life easier and we don't have to think about it. So as you're training your horse, one of the best things you can do is just open and shut gates repetitively, time and time again. And here's another example of pressure and holding pressure and releasing pressure on the livestock that we're handling. And training our horse not to always want to go forward. Allow your horse to understand that if those cattle turn and face us, sometimes it's important for us to back up and release pressure. Just like there, I had to kind of force her back. She's gotten a little quick, so they wanted to turn in. And just because we're behind a set of cows and we may be vocalizing doesn't mean they're always going to go forward. There's always going to be a group of cows that try to get back by us. And it's our responsibility as that handler to not let that happen, because that can cause that negative additive behavior that we've talked about. Now, I like to talk about movement and staying in position. So the horse's feet can move a tremendous amount and we can cover very little ground. And when we're doing that, that means we've really trained our horse well to work in a very close environment. So watch Fritz right here. Her feet are moving a lot, but we've not really gotten out of an 8 or 10 foot diameter circle, right? And it gives us the opportunity to maintain control on the herd without causing too much negative pressure and allowing us to accomplish position to get the cattle out. So we're doing the same thing now as we transition back to Elsie. Elsie, again, we talked about, her movements are a little different. She's not as graceful. She likes to go. She flexes her head up a little bit more than Fritz, but that's not a negative. She's just a horse that's really wanting to work. Now watch how she's just a bit more aggressive as we go down beside the calves and bring them out in her actions. And even as I open and shut gates, she's just a little quicker and wanting to get back to the cows to start working sooner. And you notice we talked about calves, the cream rising to the top. These calves are sitting watching, and so we just go ahead and take advantage and get behind them and move in. Now, we're patient here, and we want to see if we can bring more calves out, be opportunistic, let these calves be drawn to these calves, and we're just simply playing with angles. And this is something that you know, this looks pretty easy, but it takes a lot of effort to train a horse to be patient, to be responsive to the one rein movements or the one hand movements. So the rein movements and the leg movements are cues from me, the rider. But once we achieve this, it makes the process very enjoyable for us, the rider, very effective for us, the manager of livestock. You notice how aggressive she was right there, a lot more aggressive horse than Fritz is. And the reason for that is we utilize Elsie a tremendous amount in loading larger cattle onto trailers and work her a lot with bulls and things of that nature. So she's inherently just a bit more aggressive because of the way that the class of cattle that I've trained her on. But she can still be very deliberate, very slow in sorting cattle off. But you see her aggressiveness there and reaching down and wanting to nip that calf caused the cows to get by. And here's where patience as a handler comes in to action. So I don't rush up there and try to get in front of the cow. I allow the cow to dictate a positioning that I can approach and allow her to sort herself off in a very low stress way and bring the calves and sort them back in. So that's something that's very important. But I would also state it's very important in understanding how important it is to utilize gaits and train your horse to be patient around gaits and allow that sidestep or lateral movement to come into action to make it easy to open and shut gaits. And it can be very dangerous opening and shutting gates sometimes. You see, Elsie gets a little more excited. She lets the cow by because she's really concentrated on the calf, but then she slows down, she's patient, she lets the cow back by. And then we open the gate and we simply move down and gather these calves back and just kind of watch her attitude, a bit more aggressive in terms of pushing and moving these calves. And that's just, again, a function of the class of livestock we've trained her on. But a very, very fun horse to ride. She's got the attitude that nothing can get the best of her, and really, really fun horse to ride. Okay, so pressure and patience. So we have to be patient, but we also have to add pressure. So these cows are drawn to these calves. And if you'll remember, let's see if I can, I'm gonna hold it right here for a second. If you'll remember in last week's video, this black white faced cow was out in the pasture and she kept trying to get my eyes. Well, you always need to keep that in mind when you're working your cattle. You get to understand that each cow has its own attitude in the way it responds to you, the handler. So this cow is one that always tries to get by the horse or always tries to get by the handler, whether I was on foot, if I was on a four-wheeler, or being on Elsie or Fritz. She's going to try to get by because she's just got that attitude. So what we as handlers of the livestock need to always do, we need to be patient, but we also need to hold pressure. Now I want you to watch what we do right here with Elsie. It's truly lateral, it's back and forth. There's no forward movement. If I go forward, she's going to come around either side of me and get by. And that results in that negative reinforcement. So that means she's going to do it time and time again to the point to where it's really going to become a disposition or a temperament issue. So what we try to do here is just lateral, side by side, whether it's cutting moves, lateral movement, or whatever, to hold pressure with patience. So kind of watch this. And it's actually a little more difficult because I'm actually trying to control two cows that are trying to get by versus one. But you see, I never really move forward. I just move side to side and I hold that pressure until they realize, hey, I'm going to go ahead. I can't get by. And so that could have been a lot worse. And someone that didn't understand that, that cow would have gotten by, unfortunately. Okay, so again, we go back to gaits. It's all important to work the gaits properly and efficiently, you know, whether we you know, do rollbacks and turns or whether we do lateral movements into, but learning to utilize the gait is something that you should probably work on a tremendous amount before you really leave that training pen and exit out into the pasture field, or if you're trail riding or whatever. Because it teaches patience in the horse, it teaches the horse how to bend, it teaches the horse how to flex, it teaches the horse how to stop when you're doing something and wait on you, the rider. And again, we go back to movement. You know, we're looking for movement in a very small space to control those angles to get the cattle to move to where we want those cattle to move. I want to back up just a little bit and show that again and just have you see how flexibility and athleticism is so much different in both these horses. You know, you can see people in reining events spinning and spinning and spinning out in the middle of the arena with no cows around. I don't know what good that does other than show off, you know, the athleticism of the horse. But in that situation, it served a purpose. It allowed us to keep those calves stationary and allowed those cows to peel off the herd really without being stressed and move into the direction that we wanted them to. So that's kind of those performance type events put into real life, useful, usable action. And again, we go back to bending. We talk about bending. I talk about Elsie not being as flexible as Fritz. Well, it's all relative. She's still a very flexible horse that's able to bend and accomplish the job that we want her to. And a lot of it's just based on repetition and training. And I think I've gotten Elsie as flexible as she's ever going to be, and she's never going to be as flexible as my red roan Fritz, but she still bends really well. So you can watch her up here as we see her body, as we want these cows to move and turn, really makes a C, right? Her whole body turns and it bends. And that increases really her balance, the safety with which, we're riding her out here in this muddy environment. And you'll notice the whole time, one thing we've never done is run or trot or even fast walk. It's all been a very, very slow, deliberate pace. And now we're talking about bending again. Now watch, she's already done a couple of S turns and then a rollback. And we've done that within a very, very short diameter or circumference of a space. So it's really attracting very, very little negative attention from the cows. We're not making a lot of noise. We're not making a lot of aggressive moves. A lot of the moves that we're making are very calm moves. And that's what it takes to keep these cattle really in a low stress mentality. Now, that winds up, and we've gone back to the initial gathering portion. So I'm going to pause it right here and ask Jenny to come on and talk just a little bit about kind of some of the things that we talked about in terms of bending our horses and how that attributes to athleticism, and then open it up for questions. So I think I need to stop sharing. Is that right?
Yeah, you can, unless you want to leave it up to kind of showcase some of what we might talk about here. So either way is really fine. And so I think a lot of what you talked about, Kevin, are things that are very applicable across the disciplines. And so, as you look between your horses, and I guess I have a question to kind of go back there, so and talk about some of those pieces. But how do you feel like you approach working with different horses that you mentioned may not have some of the same innate athleticism abilities, and getting them to be flexible both in their head and neck, in their shoulders, and moving their hindquarter? Because I know at least the questions that I get a lot from people are that maybe they're struggling to help break down maybe some tension in the horse's neck, or just like people that maybe they've ridden their horse maybe one direction more than another, and so the horse is a little bit stronger to one side. But obviously, as you're working in this environment, being able to move equally as well both sides is very important. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So one of the most important things with a really safe horse that's very enjoyable to ride, they need to be, for lack of a better descriptor, ambidextrous, right? They need to be as balanced on one side or flexible on one side as they are the other. It's so important to safety. It's so important to efficiency and effectiveness whenever we're working with cattle, because cattle are going to move from right to left, forward and backwards. And if we can respond with that horse right to left, forward and backwards, we are going to have an enjoyable time handling the cattle. It's going to allow them a reduced stress because they know they cannot escape, or for lack of a better word, outdo that horse. So it reduces the stress automatically. They submit and they start moving in the direction we want. So what Jenny talked about is so important, that we begin working on our horses. And what I like to do when I'm working with a new horse, whether it be, a 2 or 3 year old that I'm starting, or a horse that's been trail ridden for many years and gone down paths and really done very little in terms of flexibility, is I really like to start over from that point. And one of the most impactful things that I think we can do to start developing that flexibility, that ability to bend in the head, the neck, and in the body, is just to slow down and to be patient. Too many times I've seen people take their young horses or their older horses and start them out in a round pen and lunge them or are going circles in a round pen, and they're using either their lunge line or their lead rope to cause an increased movement and excitability in the horse, because they think, well, we're going to go ahead and we're going to tire our horse down, and then we're going to ride it, and we're less likely to have an adverse event, right? Well, what that does, it may ultimately calm them down, and they behave better. But what that does, that heightens really the activeness of that horse. So they're going quicker, and they're trying to over respond to what you're doing. They're remembering what happened in the round pen, and you wanting them to speed up while they were going in a left-hand circle, and then stop as you lowered yourself and turned them in another direction, and you sped them up again. Well, then you get on their back, and they're really trying to pay attention and almost overreact and move too quickly, and then they lose that flexibility. So what I try to teach people to do is to get on a horse, be extremely relaxed, give them their head, have a lot of curve in that rein, and then let's walk around in that round pen, okay? And let's approach head on, that panel, and let's start turning our horses to the right or to the left, and begin, with that rein pressure. You can do this two-handed with downward pressure at the pole, so that they're bending their head down, and they're turning right, and then they're turning left. So that begins the flexibility, but it also, we didn't get them hyped up before we did it, okay? And too many times I think we have relaxed horses when we go to the pasture and get them, right? And it really starts there, and having a horse that's willing to be caught. If we have a horse that's not willing to be caught, and I apologize for the length of this answer, there's just a whole lot of answer to that question. There's a horse that's not willing to be caught. We all of a sudden we're beginning off at a negative, because we're having to aggravate, and we're having to accelerate the tension in that horse to catch it, right? We're capturing that horse, doing something it doesn't want. Well, that all of a sudden really accelerates its poor attitude. So if we have a horse that we've worked with over time, very comfortable in being caught, we take that horse to the round pen, we go ahead and we brush and we clean the hooves and we saddle. And then we start working in a calm way by going ahead and saddling up, going ahead and getting on and doing those flexibility things. That horse is going to respond better than if we chased the horse through the pasture, we finally got it caught, we brushed it, we cleaned its hooves, and now we go out here with the lunge line, and we go in circles to the right, and we go in circles to the left, and then we hop on, and that horse is never calmed down yet. It's going to want to raise that head and be less apt to be flexible. So it really all starts with our attitude in trying to accomplish these things. And I think it can be more easily done if we're calm and just work on getting that horse to bend its head low when it turns, and do that out in the pasture field, do that out on the trail. I do a lot of this around trees. We've got a set of 3 oak trees in front of our handling barn. So lots of times I'll take that horse out, and we'll actually do figure 8s around those oak trees. And I do that until they're extremely comfortable with having that head down and bending that nose around that tree and flexing that head around that tree, and then the body follows. That teaches that horse how to really curve or bend that body. I hope that kind of explained that answer, Dr. Ivy.
That was great, and I appreciate that you ended on that note, because that leads me really well into the next point. So you read my mind. And so one of the things I think that people tend to mistake, and I was as guilty of this too when I first started kind of learning how to help move the different pieces at the time, is the importance of engaging the hindquarter to help move that horse forward and help them to be able to move their head and neck. And that slow does not always have to mean disengaged from the hind end, and rather you'd like to keep that movement. And so especially in watching a lot of those clips, you can see how very quickly the horse is able to move, whether it's Fritz or Elsie, forward, backward, side to side, and keep a lot of that lightness of their feet. And so I think when you talk about, the technical term that I think the industry uses is the direct rein or the leading rein that allows them to bring the nose around. But keeping that hind end engaged and moving forward allows the horse to be able to create that bend and movement and flexibility. And so as you're working with maybe a younger horse, besides the things that you've already mentioned, how do you help maybe break that down or keep it more low stress for the horse, but also practical? Maybe if the horse isn't doing what you want it to do, or you're out in the middle of the field and they're having a little minor come apart, but you really can't just go back to the barn and call it quits.
Absolutely. So that's the worst thing that could ever happen is go back to the barn and call it quits. And as you know, and unfortunately that tends to happen too often because we as the rider, you know, especially if we don't have that confidence level, can allow that to irritate us. So the best thing to do in that situation, in keeping that horse moving in the direction you want, and in keeping that horse flexible, but understanding that a young horse or an inexperienced horse is never going to do exactly what you want. And we can, the best attitude we can have going into that is understanding that it's not going to happen the way that it should or will on an experienced horse. So you always try to give a young horse that becomes a bit scared or agitated a way out, okay? A release without really giving them the idea that they defeated you, because really they haven't. So you just want to what I like to do if I'm working a young horse and I'm out in an open pasture field, I always want that horse to be engaged with the activities we've started developing them in this smaller environment. So I think at the beginning of the first session, we talked about some of this. So I'll work the horse in I never really work in a round pen much because I don't really have access to one. I like to have that connectivity to the horse. So I use a 15-foot lead rope to start all the horses I have. And so I really begin there with groundwork to teach that, you know, engaging and disengaging, be it on the front end or the rear end, and then teaching that flexibility of the head and neck. So they gain that trust with me. And then I'm always giving them an escape. So that translates on the ground to when you're on the horse. So I advance that into cattle within a smaller pasture or a more confined area. And then they learn their responsibility to track, to rate, to step in front of, to stand its ground and hold pressure, or to cut. So they're engaged and they understand that they're engaged. So that keeps them focused, but at the same time, going back to their connection with me, starting them on that 15-foot lead line, they're really waiting for my direction as well. Be it direction to say, yes, continue in forward movement, or to stop, let's back up, or wait a minute, you've done this wrong, so I'm going to have to correct you. And so when you correct a horse that has kind of lost its way out in the pasture and doing something you don't want, if they go back to whenever you were in that small confined area at the end of that 15-foot lead rope and you corrected them in an extremely harsh manner that resulted in some type of fear response, they're going to do the same thing in that open pasture because they all of a sudden realize because of your change in body position and posture and attitude, you're going to do something that's going to be extremely negative for them. And so all of a sudden the fear response at the end of that 15-foot lead rope now turns into something where you're on top of them and they've got a little better advantage of you there, so that can be negative. So the reason I always try to be calm and patient in correction with that at the end of that 15-foot lead rope, because it's directly impactful if I'm going to be laying on the ground and walking back to the barn whenever I try to correct that horse out in the pasture. So what I'm trying to say is, whenever we correct our horses, let's correct them with respect. Let's correct them with firmness and respect, but nothing that causes fear and them trying to escape from us. Because whenever we're trying to correct that horse out in the pasture, they all of a sudden really do have an advantage on us because they're in the open area, and there's a tremendous amount of strength there. So if I correct the horse in the round pen, uh, basically what I'm going to do is just a couple of quick jerks on that 15-foot lead rope and make them back up, okay? And then we stop, and then we start all over. So that's exactly what I do in the pasture field. So if you see me out with a young horse in the pasture field and all of a sudden they're doing something they shouldn't, I tend to stop that horse immediately and begin backing that horse up. And what that really, I attribute that to is just resetting or rebooting the computer. It gets their mind back off that negative event. It reminds them of whenever I was training them in the pen that, hey, I'm not doing something right. It's time to start over. That's just my way of doing it, Dr. Ivy.
And I think that's really helpful because, even just from my own experience, when you've got something that's not going right, it's easy to get frustrated and irritated across the board. And so, whether it's a backup or, let's go back to something that that horse knows and that you're comfortable with, I think is really helpful to be able to reset everybody and make sure that it's not just a building or an additive event that's going to end up in someone or something getting really injured.
Right.
So a lot of this, you showed us some gait maneuvering abilities, and kind of this is the last comprehensive question that I've got for you. So if any of you that are listening have some questions that you'd like Kevin to answer, please make sure that you stick them in the chat section, and I'm going to open our second poll here so that way you guys can tell us what you thought. So again, if you've already filled this out, please do so again for us. We really appreciate it. That way we have information from each independent session. But could you talk a little bit about how you teach your horses to work a gait, how you practice that, maybe even just from the beginning of how you start to ask your horse to move those parts independently, knowing that that's kind of your end goal? Because I think really everybody should hopefully be able to know how to do that, no matter what you ride or how you ride. It's a good skill to have. But also especially thinking about how to do that safely. Like you mentioned, gaits can kind of be a dangerous situation if you're not careful and not doing it right, in lots of places to potentially get hung. So what's your approach on that, and how do you try to do that in a progressive manner?
Yeah, the first thing I do is start, with that 15-foot lead rope. Whenever we start working a horse, I'm on the ground and we start opening and closing gates and making noise and rattling with chains and things of that nature until they become comfortable with that. Then what I really like to do, and I do this on the ground as well, I start out on the ground teaching that lateral movement or that side passing in essence, and I'll face, I don't know if you can still see my cursor. Can you still see my cursor on the screen I'm sharing? So
yes,
what I'll try to do, if you see this gate or this panel that runs up and down through here, on that 50-foot or 15-foot lead rope, I'll actually bring the horse to face this. And then I will teach and work with, and it usually takes about 3 days, and then most horses become very proficient at it, is just to laterally move down facing this fence all the way up and down. And it's about a 50-foot long stretch both ways. And we teach them to go down, and I'm just putting a little pressure on them from the left side to teach them just to side pass all the way down facing that set of panels, and then I'll reverse my position and we'll do it all the way down here, facing that. So that teaches them to approach things before we ever get on them, pressure from a side, and then to start crossing those feet over and disengaging and engaging in the right, safe manner. And then I will do that once I start riding these young horses or a horse that's just not used to gaits. I'll just start opening and closing gates on them. It can look very awkward. It can look very strange until they get used to it. And we use that leg pressure. I'm using that off leg pressure to push their body sideways into the gate as we approach those gates. Because I think one of the ways that most people are injured, and you can get injured really seriously by doing this. If you approach gates head on with a horse and you lean over that horse's head to reach down and unchain a gate, as soon as you make a noise, the response of that horse is to get away from that noise and that horse is going to raise its head really quickly. And if your head is directly over that horse's head, who's going to win every time? The horse is, right? And so I've actually seen people knocked off their horses trying to open gates because they approach those gates in a perpendicular fashion or a head-on fashion. So you should always approach the gates from the side and have that horse with your off-leg pressure move into the gate. And I honestly like to feel that horse pressuring my onside or my leg that's in between the horse and the gate. I like to feel it pressure up against the gate. Okay, that way I know that horse is significantly there where I want him to be. Then I just give the horse rein. I don't want to be jerking on its head or anything. I don't want it to back up all of a sudden or move sideways all of a sudden. I reach down, I grab the chain or the latch and open that gate. And so that's one of those things that just takes a lot of practice, but it's something that's really, to me, it's a very satisfying thing because horses tend to learn that really quick, and they learn to do it the right way really quick. But there's no better way to do it than doing what we saw in today's video, is just a tremendous amount of repetition. And that horse begins to understand where it needs to be, how fast it needs to walk by a gate that you reach down and close back behind it. So it's just a lot of repetition. But it begins on the end of that 15-foot lead rope and teaching that horse to control its feet, teaching it to move laterally, teaching it once you get on it to respond to that leg pressure, and just being patient and dropping that head.
And that exercise you mentioned of going up and down the fence line is something that, and as a dressage and event rider, we call them head to wall and tail to wall leg yields. So I think it's, something that we really value, and the ability to be able to move your horse like that is really such an important feature and such an important aspect to be able to practice and train, and is even possible to do once you're out there as you're warming up, I think, in a pasture, to kind of practice moving side to side and give that horse something to think about. So thank you for explaining that. You have go ahead.
That is something that's so important. That movement right there, it works with gates, but you can also place yourself in the correct position out in open pasture fields to stop cattle from moving without alarming them. So that, to me, the ability to teach your horse to do that in confined areas and open areas is probably one of the best moves that you can teach a horse in terms of controlling the movement of a herd. So yeah, very good.
So we had a question come in through the Q&A. How do you address and ride around aggressive cattle?
So that's a very good point. So the first thing is aggressive cattle tend to also make people's attitude very aggressive, right? And so the first thing you have to do is to remain calm and go into that approach, understanding that there's always going to have to be a plan B in hand. But basically, the correct answer to that is, and the answer that, or the action that I implement every time I go to a facility that has that issue, and I do that quite often, is you have to understand and respect that cow or that herd's space. So you approach at a further distance away. So you're taking wider circles around. You're approaching the same angle, but at a greater distance to elicit the response of that cow or that herd to go in the appropriate fashion. So you're further away. You're doing the same patterns. You're doing the same approach. You're placing yourself within the same angles, but you're further away because that animal is just going to react to you the closer you get. So you're using that same pressure and release, you're just going to be further away. So that's all good and well in the open pasture, right? It's very easy to get wild cattle out of pastures, okay? You're just doing it at a further distance away. You learn how to rate that distance and elicit a response with your pressure and release. But where it becomes dangerous and more critical is when we have aggressive cattle within these smaller pens, right? And I think that's probably where your question was going to be. And so the first thing that you want to do if you're on a horse, is to understand that that horse gives you an advantage over that aggressive animal. And that aggressive animal typically is going to respect that horse, but don't always assume that it will. As we talked about in that first session, bulls tend to become really aggressive and can harm a horse and attack a horse. Same thing with a cow that has been patterned somehow to be aggressive towards that horse and rider. Is just understand the approach and play those angles. So typically what you do with aggressive cattle when you get them into these pens like this is you are going to ride the fence more, you know, to give yourself as much distance between them because they don't want you nearer them. The only time they're going to probably attack you or get after you and be really aggressive to you is if you ride right up on them. So once we get past, say, this Charolais cow right here that I'm circling is the aggressive one in the bunch. Yeah, so I'm going to approach her from this distance away down this fence line on the bottom side. Then I'm going to pass her shoulder and she is going to see a point of escape. Well, then I turn into that and I get behind her. Now, aggressive cattle are aggressive because they're trying to get away, okay? So then I am going to put a little bit more pressure on her, moving her towards this pen than I would these other cows, which are slow and calm and gentle. So if I keep more pressure on her, that's going to keep her moving in a forward manner, trying to escape. If I don't put a lot of pressure on her, that allows her the opportunity to turn and become more aggressive to us. Now, on the same sense, if I see her and I'm pressuring her too much and she's wanting to turn, then I release more pressure than I normally would to allow her to say, well, it's going to be easier to escape this way. You really have to play that by ear. That's a very good question, and that comes up on occasion. And there are some cows out there that are just man eaters and horse eaters that just need to be marketed and let somebody else own. Hope that answered that question.
I think so. Well, thank you again, Kevin, for all your time over the last 3 weeks and getting all these together, especially to Ashley for her assistance,
Yes.
and Dr. Garrison for getting all the footage that we've been able to do here and give us kind of a unique vantage point. All of the recorded sessions will be posted on our YouTube channel, and we hope to offer a live session of the animal handling series upcoming in the spring of 21. So after we've gotten through the fall pandemic section, and be able to offer that again live in Middle Tennessee upcoming. So check back at our website or through your county agent to be able to find that information, and hopefully we will see you then. Thanks so much.
Thank y'all.